I'm odd when it comes to paranormal things in life. I topple between believing in it and not believing in it. I guess it's more like I don't want to believe in it. For as long as I can remember, I've always been afraid of mirrors and dark windows. Nothing ever happened, but for some reason I just never liked to go near them, so I always tended to avoid them. The house I used to live in with my parents was claimed to be haunted. They still live there, but I have since moved out. It was an old hospital back in the 1800s. It's not very big hospital standard-wise, but for a house it was rather large. My bedroom was on the 3rd floor of the house. It was like a small apartment. I had my main bedroom, a living room, bathroom, and a room that we called the glass ceiling room because the ceiling was made of glass. When we first moved into that house, I claimed a much smaller room on the 2nd floor, and I was always afraid to go up on the 3rd floor, especially alone. What drove me to want to move up there, I still don't know, but it wasn't so bad after I moved all my things up. The first few nights I slept on the 3rd floor, things were okay, nothing unusual, but after maybe a week or so, I started noticing odd occurrences. The door to my bedroom was loose, and every night around the same time, which was roughly between 1 and 2 a.m., my door would slowly creak open. Not a lot, but just enough to make that eerie sound, before it would slam back shut. This woke me up constantly. I thought at first it was just the air conditioner, as the vents were on the ceiling rather than the floor. But this occurred even when there was no air. Still, I assumed it was just because the house was old. The glass ceiling room was always kept shut. I didn't like it. My friends didn't like it. During the day it was a gorgeous room, with sunny walls and bright light illuminating the area, but at night it seemed to take an all-new demeanor. Several of my friends would make comments about seeing shadows in that room, or hearing whispers. I would tell them that the shadows were caused by streetlights outside, and the whispers were probably just my neighbors, as their house was extremely close to mine. I always seemed to have an explanation that I thought was logical. However, I still have no explanation as to how this event happened. I had a friend over one night. Her name was Logan. The two of us would always like to goof around with scary things, telling each other stories and reading others online. We decided to play hide and seek in the dark room with my younger brother. When it came time for me to be it, I went into my brother's room to start counting. I found my brother fairly quickly, but Logan was hopping from place to place, making it harder to find her. I was just about to give up and admit defeat when I hear the most intense scream I had ever heard from her before. It was coming from the 3rd floor. I rushed towards the stairs, but she was already racing down them, so fast that she slammed into me. Through her sobbing and hyperventilating, I got her to tell me what had happened. Apparently, Logan decided to go upstairs and hide in the glass ceiling room as her final hiding spot. While she was standing behind the door listening for me, she claimed she heard someone whispering her name behind her. When she turned around, obviously no one was there. What happened next still chills me. She said that as she turned back to the door, she felt someone grab a handful of her hair and yank it so hard her head was jerked back. Logan was never one to lie, and she definitely wasn't a good actor, so I knew that something must have happened to her to get her this worked up. We ended up sleeping downstairs in the living room that night, and Logan never came back to my house after that. Fast forward a few years, and I'm sitting on the couch in my living room upstairs. I was watching a movie when all of a sudden I felt compelled to look towards the window just across from my couch. It had a little window seat that my grandmother made a small cushion for, so I could sit there and read. I had a really odd feeling, like someone was sitting in the window nook staring at me. I decided to go downstairs and walk the dogs with my dad. I had almost forgotten about the creepy feelings until we returned home. As soon as we walked up the driveway, I shot a glance up at the 3rd-story window where my reading nook was. And there, staring back down at me, was the pale face of what looked like an elderly lady. My blood ran cold. I wanted to ask my dad if he saw her too, but I was too scared to say anything, and I knew he was not a believer in the paranormal. At all. I ended up sleeping downstairs once more. Not long after that event, I was home alone with my 3 dogs. We were all laying in the living room, me on the floor watching TV. My eldest dog, Chip, who also happened to be the sweetest dog in the world, suddenly leapt up from the chair and began to bark and growl at the ceiling above him. Some background on Chip. He has since passed away since this incident. He was suffering from stomach cancer, which is why I was surprised when he found the energy to jump around barking and growling. He also never barked and growled, so this also startled me. Chip was a good-sized dog, and in his prime he was a tank. He was part Doberman mixed with Golden Retriever, with the sweetest temperament ever. The hairs on the back of his neck were raised, and he was snarling so viciously I was slightly afraid to go near him. His actions caused my other 2 dogs, a Husky and a Chug, to join in. They eventually moved from the chair to the front of the stairs that led up to the 2nd floor. Chip climbed halfway up the stairs with ease, which again was odd since he was so old and ill. He stopped, and his eyes locked at the top of the stairs as he continued to snarl and bark. I followed him, and that was the first time I actually saw a shadow-like figure flee from sight. I called my parents and told them what was happening. They were more concerned about Chip, as they didn't want him overworking himself, but as I knew they would, they told me it was nothing. I began to have vivid night terrors after that. Dreams of monstrous shadows looming over me, taking me by the hand and leading me off into a shadowy forest. I would wake up drenched in sweat and unable to move. Along my walls, shadows would dance and slither towards me. I would just shut my eyes and pray for them to go away. As the days went on, my dreams would get worse. Eventually they became so vivid I had to talk to a counselor, as they were starting to be about my loved ones dying in horrible ways. One dream in particular I can recall was that of my boyfriend. He has an old sports car that he likes to drive and be reckless in. The dream started off with me in an arena-like setting, one you would go watch motorbike races in or something. A boy I went to school with, but never really talked to, raced by me in his car and wrecked it. I remember I rushed towards him to see if he was okay, but his head was missing and his body was crushed. Then more and more people I went to school with, but never talked to, began to die in horrible ways around me. I was panicking. I didn't know what to do or how to get out of this arena. Soon the people dying were the ones closer to me, best friends, family members, but the death I remember most vividly was that of my boyfriend, Luke. He raced past me in his old sporty car. He had a smile on his face and he blew me a kiss as he rushed by. I remember screaming for him to stop, but my voice just wouldn't come out. Like everyone before him, Luke wrecked his car. Only his burst into flames. I frantically dug him out. The smell of burnt flesh filled my nostrils. I could actually smell his skin burning in my dream. I pulled him from the rubble and held him in my arms. His head was bent sideways, and the bones from his spine were sticking out. One of his eyes were missing, leaving a dark, empty socket staring at me. Blood was spurting from his mouth and nose, and he was making a gurgling noise. What was creepiest of all about this dream was that as he lay there, dying in my arms, he still had a smile on his face. That dream was the last straw for me. I ended up getting a job as soon as I was old enough, so I could save up money and move out. The last thing that happened to me before I moved out was actually not in the house at all. I had left for work at around 2. It was a bright summer day, which is why this seemed odd to me. My work was about 30 minutes away in a town called Easton. I'd take a lot of back roads to get there, including one that goes by my old high school. Down one back road is a dump where people drop off their trash. I can recall driving past the dump and looking out my rearview mirror, and something was running after my car. I assumed it was a jogger, as they are not an uncommon sight around where I live. But something was different about this figure. It was definitely masculine, I could tell by its physique. However, it was almost keeping up with the speed of my car. I glanced at my speedometer just to make sure I wasn't driving slow. I was going almost 50 miles an hour, and this thing was practically right behind me, running on 2 legs. It was then that I noticed it had no features. No face, no clothing lines, nothing. It was just a black figure, almost transparent. I stopped at the stop sign just up the road a little ways, though I was reluctant to. But when I glanced back at the figure, it had just stopped and was standing there at the top of the hill, staring at me. I peeled away as quickly as I could and decided not to tell anyone of this event. On my way home that night, I took the long way back, even though I was dangerously curious to see if it would chase me again. My boyfriend and I have since moved out on our own and no longer live with our parents. We moved into an old apartment complex that was made out of an old church, and I haven't had any strange occurrences since then. My night terrors have stopped, and I haven't seen any more shadowy figures. I still visit my parents often, as they only live about 15 minutes away. My little brother has decided to take over the 3rd floor now, and so far I haven't heard any stories from him. But then again, I never asked. This is a short story, but probably one of the creepiest things that has ever happened to me, and my most vivid childhood memory. I was very young at the time, probably no older than 6 or 7. Myself, my mom, brother, and older sister all lived in a house together in a neighborhood called Oak Hill. Our house was right next to a cemetery, one of those small, neat-looking veteran cemeteries. I never thought much of it. It didn't really creep me out or anything, but I was a good kid, and out of respect, I mostly avoided it. One night I was sleeping on the couch with my mom. My brother, who was roughly the same age as me, was sleeping on the love seat next to us, and my sister, who was in her late teens at the time, was sleeping in her room. My mother and I suddenly awoke to the sound of a loud, horrible pounding on the back door, which was in the kitchen in the next room over. This wasn't any normal pounding, like if you were to beat on someone's door with your fist. It literally sounded like whoever it was using a sledge to break through the door. My brother was already awake and sitting in the corner in a fetal position, crying and rocking. Frantic, my mother and I stumbled to our feet. Tears were already welling in my eyes. I was terrified. All I wanted to do was bolt through the front door and into the car, but we had to get my sister. In order to do this, we would have to walk right past the kitchen and move down the hall to her room. My mother didn't want to leave my brother and I alone in the living room, so we huddled together and began to crawl, moving slowly towards the hallway. Thinking back, I don't think we were crawling for any reason other than sheer terror, as we still would have been clearly visible to whoever was trying to get in. We had one of those back doors with skewed windows on it, and the door faced the very hallway that we were trying to crawl through. So anyway, crawling, we approached the opening along the wall that divides the living room, kitchen, and the hallway leading to my sister's room. At this point, we could hear glass shattering and raining onto the ground clear as day. Slowly, my mom and I began to peer around the corner to look into the kitchen, expecting to see glass everywhere and someone climbing through the window on the door. The kitchen was to our left, and the hall was to our right. Amazingly though, there was nothing. No glass. The door still intact. And if there was someone out there, we couldn't see them. Still though, every 1 or 2 seconds there was that pounding, and now we knew for certain that it was definitely coming from the door. After probably a moment or two of hesitation, we hurriedly crawled down the hall to my sister's room. As soon as we were in, my mom sat her up and said, "We have to leave. Someone's trying to break in." We rushed back down the hallway, into the living room, and straight out of the front door into the car. This time, not stopping to see if whoever was out there had gotten in. But I remember, for the briefest second as we passed, seeing a figure standing in the middle of our kitchen watching us, out of my peripheral. We drove to a gas station, which was probably a mile down the road, to use the payphone. This was in the early 90s, so no one had cell phones yet. My mom called the cops. They came, and we followed them back to our house. After they went and checked everything out, they came and got us all, and told us that they didn't find anyone. We walked around the yard, the officer shining his flashlight around searching the ground for any signs of anyone, and the kitchen door. I was expecting the door to be broken, and to find glass all over the place, but there was still nothing. The back door, nor the window, had been touched. The back door was still even locked. There was no broken glass, no sign of any damage to the house, no sign that anyone had been on or around the property. Nothing. To this day, I still can't explain what happened that night. None of us can. We all heard the same thing. All of us could have swore that at any moment, someone would be coming through the kitchen door. Or at the very least, someone was destroying something on our property. Yet it was as if it was a part of our imagination. Several years ago, my wife and I rented an upstairs apartment from one of my dad's acquaintances. The guy's elderly mother lived downstairs, so he thought it would be a good idea to have some young people around to help keep an eye on her. It was a huge apartment, and we were allowed to use the attic, so we did not have to pay for a storage unit to store all of our extra stuff. The guy gave us a great discount on the rent, because we kept his mom company. We also did odd jobs for her, such as mowing the lawn and taking out her garbage. Plus, there was a convenience store, as well as a video rental store, next to the house. We lived there several months before paranormal things started to happen. It began with footsteps in the hallway outside of our bedroom. The footsteps would pace back and forth down the long hallway. They were subtle for the most part, but since we had hardwood floors, the floorboards would creak very loudly once in a while. I would rush out of the bedroom, expecting a burglar or crazy homeless person, but no one was ever there. This happened every night without fail. Eventually, we would just lay there in bed frightened out of our minds as we listened to the ghostly footsteps. After several more months, the activity took a brand new behavior. The footsteps would now stop in front of the bedroom door for several moments before resuming their pacing. My ex-wife claimed that the doorknob would occasionally squeak as if someone was trying to turn it. I never personally heard the squeaking doorknob, but there was no reason for her to make it up. Luckily, the door never did open to reveal a ghost, or an intruder for that matter. One night, I got up at around 3 a.m. to use the bathroom when I saw a pair of translucent legs. There was nothing above the waist. Walked past the bed and straight into the hall. It startled me, but I tried my best to dismiss it as a hypnotic hallucination. These are visual hallucinations that people can sometimes have when they first wake up from a deep sleep. On another night, we ended up catching several creepy voices on a digital recorder with a male voice up in the attic telling us to leave it alone. We decided to move out after 2 years. We were carrying out the last of our stuff, and the old lady downstairs asked if we were moving out because of the ghost. We were silent, not knowing how to respond. Then she told us that her son had gone up there to perform some sort of makeshift exorcism before we first moved in. He had gone through all of the rooms with holy water while reading Bible verses. Obviously, it did not work, but I thought it was cool because it helped validate our paranormal experiences. Months after moving out, and through a bit of digging at the public library, we found out that there had once been a cemetery next to the house. In the 1850s, the townsfolk realized the cemetery had reached maximum capacity, so the graves were relocated to a more suitable site that could be expanded. Unfortunately, it was rumored that a few of the graves were left behind. More than a century later, the convenience store and video rental store were located directly on top of where the cemetery had once been. It was all reminiscent of the Poltergeist movie, with the buildings being placed on top of the graves that had been disrupted. I still wonder to this day if this ghostly activity was somehow related to the old cemetery that had once been near the house. Had the disturbed graves caused an uprest in the spirits? How can these spirits be appeased? All I know is that I sincerely wish these spirits peace. I am a 15-year-old female sophomore living in West Virginia, USA. I've always been close to my family and friends. Maybe that's why I have this odd sixth sense sort of thing. I never really noticed I had it until just before my great uncle had passed away due to a heart attack when I was in 7th grade. Just before a loved one dies, I go through a week of extreme anxiety, and during said time frame, I also feel beyond depressed. I'd cry and freak out about almost everything. My chest and stomach would get a weird tingly feeling too, that stays in that week. When my great uncle Doodle died, I just thought my 12-year-old mind was being its typical stupid self. I blamed the stomach and chest stuff on my chronic Lyme disease issues I've been dealing with since I was 6. It was when his wife, my great aunt Nancy, died a few months later that I started listening to my sense. About a week prior, that feeling came back. I shrugged it off and went about my business. The last time I ever saw and talked to her was a beautiful September evening. My "someone's gonna die" alert was going off like crazy that night. My parents, brother, and I had gone out to the store to get her a couple of groceries, since she was mostly blind and needed help with that sort of thing. We pulled into the driveway and handed her the shopping bag. She started talking away like she always did. I will never forget those last words I ever heard from her. "Every time I see you, you look more like my mother. You're such a beautiful young lady, and I don't ever want you to think you're not. I know you've got a bright future ahead. I love you, baby doll." We all said our goodnights and goodbyes, and my parents drove us home. That night, I couldn't get a single bit of sleep. I tossed and turned and stared at the ceiling for hours, until I just gave up. Sleep wasn't going to happen that night. I stayed up until about 10 minutes before I was supposed to wake up, drawing in my sketchbook and listening to music. I got ready for school and walked to the bus stop across the street from my grandmother's house, which is only 2 streets from my house. When I got there, the atmosphere just felt really off. I looked up the hill behind me, which is where my great aunt's house was. A wave of worry hit me so hard I thought I'd be sick. I turned back around to face the road to try to ignore it. That day at school was nothing but an anxiety attack and a half. I got home that day to my mom crying. That's when I received the news of Nancy's passing. She was found in the shed that morning beneath supplies in it. I went to my room and cried until my eyes ran dry. That weird feeling went away. I had always been super close to Nancy, which is why it was her that I saw about 2 weeks back. That feeling is back, but I don't know who's next. I was in bed and just reached the state of finally getting into a comfortable position to sleep. I was lying on my right side, facing the wall, when I felt a part of the bed by my legs sink in like someone was sitting on it. I looked at it, but there was nothing there but a freezing cold sunken spot. Then I saw her. She was sort of transparent, with a dim golden glow around her. I looked at Nancy in awe. She looked at me with her seafoam green eyes and smiled at me. Then she faded. I began to cry until I eventually cried myself to sleep. I told my parents, but they thought I was either nuts or dreaming. That was expected, honestly. I then went to my grandmother's for breakfast before school and told her. She froze and asked, "You get those feelings too?" I told her that I did. She sighed and told me that a couple hours before her death, she smells roses. She smelt them very strongly the morning they found Nancy and the evening they found Doodle. I don't know what exactly it is, but it's kind of creepy. I want to know more about this, but I don't want to look like someone who's got a few screws loose upstairs. Since that feeling is back currently,
I've been keeping a close watch on everyone I love. I don't know who death's next victim will be. I'm not sure I want to know. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. If you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you email it to yourmaker6260@gmail.com. I appreciate everyone watching, and I'm looking for a lot more paranormal stories, and also some alien stories. I really love those ones. So if you have any stories you'd like to share, make sure to email them to me. I'll catch you guys in the next video. And just remember to watch your back, because you never know who or what is watching you. We also did odd jobs for her, such as mowing the lawn and tackling her garbage. Tackling